we get the information from the speakers. So welcome. We appreciate your coming. This is a very timely topic, and I think we've assembled a group of panelists together that can help you with not only identifying the issues that may threaten your tree surf operations, specifically maple, but also kind of how to become engaged in a network of a community network of how to go ahead and solve and cooperatively and collaboratively address some threats that may be important to your sugar operation and your forest health, essentially. So with that, we've assembled some panelists to help us understand the connection between the federal level in terms of their efforts with some of these threats, and also how we bring it down to the state level, specifically Virginia and West Virginia. Maybe some subtle differences, maybe a lot of similarities, but either way, what we want to do is introduce you to some possible resources that will allow you to enter that network and get you any technical assistance that you may need down the road if for some reason you have questions about your threats to your forest. So I don't want to spend a lot of time talking. I see we have someone here from Pure, Michigan. So I wanted to start off, and Kate may address this later, but this is part of an ACER grant program that we have. It's a collaborative arrangement. And so we do these sessions once a month and try and address a whole bunch of different topics as they relate to your decision-making in the forest while you're doing tree surf production. So I'm in Fayette County right now, but most of you have talked to me before and know that I am remotely based. With that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce your speakers. We have a series of 4 questions that they have prepared. And the good news is they're ones that give you the opportunity to formulate some questions, but also to have those resources that you may need further down the road. So Kate and I would like you to go ahead and feel free as you're going along. If something comes up, go ahead and enter your questions or your resources. Sometimes we have folks that provide additional resources that we are not aware of, which makes for some good communication in the Q&A or chat box. And between all of us, we'll monitor those and we'll address them at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the 2 West Virginia folks, and actually it's really the federal and the state level. And then I'll let Tom Hammett, my colleague at Virginia Tech, introduce our Virginia participant. So I have the honor of introducing Eric Ewing. Honor, I say, he was a former colleague of mine, and we've worked together. He's really diverse, and he's very open to applications in terms of what he does in taking those federal programs and making them work at the landowner level. So Eric began his career as a nursery inspector with the West Virginia Department of Agriculture in the Plant Industries Division, and he started a year after I did with the department in 1995. During his time in this role, he worked with nursery operators and Christmas tree farmers to identify and control insect pests and diseases. He brings a lot of practical knowledge to his work. He moved into several other positions within that division for the next 21 years, and he served as the supervisor of the Plant Pest Regulatory Program, assistant division director, and finally became a division director in November 2013. In December of 2016, Eric accepted a new position with USDA APHIS PPQ as West Virginia State Plant Health Director. His duties include overseeing the activities of 5 full-time staff members and 4 seasonal employees. I will also add that he's an excellent liaison between the department and work at the federal level. The West Virginia PPQ work unit conducts pest survey and treatment programs, certifies plant material for export, and cooperates with agencies and stakeholders throughout the state to protect agricultural interests and natural areas from the threat of invasive pests. I'm going to say one of the highlights of working with Eric was the time I brought in buyers from China, and we did a tour of southern West Virginia for plant material for the Beijing Olympics. So Eric is very diverse. James Watson is our West Virginia Department of Agriculture Plant Industries Division representative. He's the spotted lantern Fly Program Coordinator. And I've not had the honor of meeting James, but I know he's doing good work with that program. It's a very active program as they work on education and some intervention techniques. He's from Fairmont, West Virginia. His work responsibilities focus on preventing the spread of the spotted lanternfly in West Virginia. And if you're not aware, that is very critical in the work with maple and tree species within the forest flora. And he manages existing infestations of this insect pest. He also assists with many other forest health issues across West Virginia as needed. His background is in forestry ecology, and he graduated with his bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees from my alma mater, West Virginia University. Tom, would you please introduce Scott and tell us about the Virginia connection?
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to introduce Scott Salom. He is a colleague of mine that I hadn't met until today, actually. So good to meet you, Scott. Scott came to Virginia Tech after getting his PhD at the University of British Columbia. And between him and several of his colleagues, they've been working on several of the pests, especially those in the forest. He's well-known in the professional community, has a long list of international activities related to entomology. I know that the department has a very strong outreach program. I'm a benefit, and my children are a benefit of this outreach program. The basic focus is forest insects with other research questions, but a couple of them I'd like to tell you about. The woolly adelgid, which we know is a big problem, a devastating insect pest here in the region. He's done some research with tree of heaven. Maybe he'll tell us about that tonight. The emerald ash borer, which we know has been just devastating our ash resource. Especially if you're a baseball fan, you're probably very, very, very interested in that. And several other small projects, many of them funded through USDA, some of them through the Forest Service. So without further ado, we're really glad you're here. We know that spotted lanternfly will be on the agenda tonight, and Scott brings a wealth of information and experience with that. So without further ado, Cindy, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Excellent. Kate has taught me how to unmute, but not very quickly. Sorry about that. So what our format is going to be tonight is we're going to go ahead and go question by question. I don't think I've shared this, but the order of what we'll do is we'll start with Eric, then we'll go into Scott, and then James. I'm not having you head up the rear, but I think you and Eric will tag team very well and blend in with what Scott has to share with us. So we'll go question by question. A few folks, I know Scott for sure, and James have prepared some slides that will be good visuals, and Eric, I'm sure, will actually back all that up with his comments. So we will go ahead and start with our first question and say it is in Virginia, or in some cases West Virginia. What are your major pest and environmental threats to maple stands, maple production, and I'd also add basically tree serfs and forest health? So Eric, I'm going to go with you and start about if you could address that on the federal level. What are you all recognizing as threats that we need to think about?
Okay, thanks, Cindy. And thanks, Scott and James, for having visuals. I'm sure this will help. And I will just preface this by saying that we don't do a lot of forest health work in PPQ, but we do a lot of regulatory work that involves pests that can affect forest trees. And the big one that we're concerned about probably with maple, and it has been this way for a long time, is Asian longhorn beetle. I'm sure you've all heard of it. It's native to China and Korea, I think. Caused a lot of problems in several different parts of the country. The good news is we've had some good success in eradicating this pest from areas in the past. I think we've eradicated from 2 different locations, Chicago and New Jersey. And I have on good authority that the infestation in Long Island, they expect eradication in a few years, maybe 4 years. So making some good progress on that pest. And So far, it's shown up in urban areas, ports, port environments. It's come in on untreated packing material, wood packing material. So that has been obviously a problem. It's not a great flyer from what I understand. So it doesn't spread that quickly unless we spread it, unless humans spread it artificially. So if we can educate people to avoid that, so far we've been pretty successful in keeping it out of heavily forested areas. There is a new infestation in South Carolina right now, and that just started, I think, about a year ago, and they're working on that. I'm not really sure how big the area is. I don't think it's real large. So a big eradication effort going on down there that we've put a lot of resources into that. So Asian longhorn beetle is definitely one that has been on our radar for quite some time now. And also, and James will have better information than me on this, spotted lanternfly is maple is on its list of plants that it feeds upon. Haven't heard of any serious damage to maples yet. I have heard one person say they thought they saw some sugar maples that looked a little weepy, maybe not necessarily in danger or a serious threat, but they might have looked a little weepy from spotted lanternfly feeding. But James could probably speak to that better than I can. So I don't think it's a major threat at this point, but we're trying to control that to keep it from becoming that. And I'll pass it along to the other two gentlemen.
So Scott, I think that's for you. Tell us about Virginia. Are you facing the same issues?
Okay, yeah. Let me see if I can share my screen here.
Kate, do we need to free up, give him permission to share his screen?
And I have to allow Zoom to share your screen. I have to open my system preferences. This is a new computer, which this might be a problem. So I may not have visuals
Scott,
right now.
you can go ahead and send your PowerPoint to either myself or Tom, and we can share for you too.
All right, let me try that.
Do you want to go ahead and do that, and we'll move to James in the meantime?
Yeah. Okay.
All right, perfect. We'll go ahead and do that and let the tech happen. So James, you're on.
All right, well, thank you. Let me go ahead and see if I can get my screen shared here as well.
Okay,
right,
looks like
what
you're
are you-
switching. Oh, awesome. Okay, and you're in slideshow mode, so you might want to put it in presentation mode if you can.
All right, can you guys see it now?
Yes.
And you cannot see a box that says something about subtitles, right?
No, I think you're good. You can go.
Good, okay. That pops up here on mine, so I want to make sure it wasn't pop up there on yours. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about threats to maple stands in West Virginia. And Eric did a great presentation there, and so these visuals will help enhance his as well. And I'm going to cover spotted lanternfly, Asian longhorn beetle, and to a very small extent, tree of heaven, as threats to maple stands in West Virginia. So a little bit about me. Again, as Cindy mentioned, I coordinate the spotted lanternfly program for the state of West Virginia, West Virginia Department of Agriculture. The spotted lanternfly, a little bit of quick information. I'll try to move through this fairly quickly. I got a lot of slides, but I want to focus more on the pictures and a little bit less on the text part of it. But scientific name, like Lycorma delicatula. It's originally native to China, Vietnam, and India to some extent. Originally, it was introduced into Pennsylvania in 2014 around Philadelphia area, and since then it has spread west and south and north, and all directions away from its original introductory site. So in this picture over here of its distribution, one thing you'll really notice is how it really follows the major travel corridors. You got, Interstate 81 there in the Shenandoah Valley, Pennsylvania Turnpike, I-81 going up into New York. So it's an excellent hitchhiker, and a major part of our message to the public is to be very careful when you're moving, vehicular traffic or any items through infested areas, make sure you check those items, upon arrival and when en route to make sure that there's not egg masses of spotted lanternfly or spotted lanternfly nymphs or adults on those materials. It's
James,
preferred host.
can you go ahead and check it and see if you've advanced your slides? We're still on the cover slide.
How about now?
Nope.
Okay, let me see here.
Hey, James, it
I
might.
know it.
Oh,
I'll get it. I think let me see here. Okay, how about that now?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, I had the wrong screen share there again. So its preferred host is tree of heaven. However, it will feed on a number of other important agricultural species and important native plants like maples. As Eric mentioned, we have not noticed significant damage on maples yet, but we have noticed extensive swarming in the last weeks that the adults are out, particularly right now, end of September through frost, on silver and red maples in particular, significant swarming. So its major issue is that it will feed on, these other plant species. Trying to figure out why oh, there we go. All right, can you guys see the next slide?
Yeah.
Perfect. My arrow keys don't work right now. So thus far, we have it confirmed in our eastern panhandle of West Virginia. And so Morgan, Berkeley, Jefferson, Hampshire, Mineral counties. It could be elsewhere in the state. It's just in other areas of the state we haven't officially confirmed it to the public or found anything more than hitchhikers at this point. So a little bit about the life cycle of spotted lanternfly. Right now, I'll start with right now since that's the time of the year we're in, October. We have a few adults that hopefully will die soon because of the frost. They're in the process right now of laying lots of egg masses. Those will hatch out in the spring and the first instar nymphs. And then second instar nymphs will start to appear. There's not a whole lot of difference in the first and second and third instar nymphs other than the size. They look about the same. And then early summer, we'll have fourth instar nymphs. A lot of literature will say that those are around, into early fall. In West Virginia, and probably the same for Virginia, fourth instar nymphs are gone. They're adults by, first, second week of August. And then we have adults, from August through frost. I keep forgetting I can't use my arrow key here. Sorry about that. So egg masses, this is what you should look for in your maple stands, egg masses. These insects love to lay their egg masses on silver maple and red maple. They'll lay them on sugar maple as well, but especially on red maple. And, I know red maple is not the preferred maple, like sugar maple to tap and black maple, but often red maple is, tapped as well in a sugar bush. So look for these in your sugar bush. A lot of literature will state that these egg masses are, very dark colored and become cracked as the season progresses, but we have not really noticed that yet in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. They pretty much stay this, kind of light tannish brown color and don't really get a, cracked appearance. Over here is I guess you can't see me with my cursor. If I move my cursor right here, can you see it? Can you see my cursor move?
Yes, we can see it. We can see it.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. This is an egg mass right here that has hatched out. So why do we care? Because they multiply so quickly and doesn't take very long before we have, a huge infestation. So here's proof. Maples. Right now we're seeing them swarm on silver maple trees. Another major issue in a forested setting is they produce copious amounts of excrement, which grow this sooty mold. And, not only is that ugly, but how are plants going to photosynthesize and produce, food for themselves if they're covered with this black mold? So this becomes heavy enough. I have seen Japanese barberry infestations actually dying in the understory because of so much of this black sooty mold. So the reality is this black sooty mold may be more of an issue or threat to maples, in a maple stand, even than actual feeding on maples themselves from the spotted lanternfly. That's just kind of what we're seeing so far. Here's kind of the potential spread of spotted lanternfly. This map doesn't show where lanternfly is currently found. That was the map I showed you a couple slides back. This just shows you where it potentially could spread in the future. So what do you do if you find spotted lanternfly? We want you to report it to us. I'll talk more about this when we get to that question. I just want to throw that out there. And resources for spotted lanternfly. Preventing infestations of spotted lanternfly. Important message we're trying to get out to the public is to remove tree of heaven. It's the preferred host. It's an invasive plant. Remove tree of heaven and smash up the egg masses of spotted lanternfly. If you have spotted lanternfly, it's becoming an issue on your property. You can use either contact insecticides or systemic insecticides on the tree of heaven. Active ingredients that are good in contact insecticides, we bifenthrin. And for a systemic insecticide, a good active ingredient would be dinotefrin or metocloprid. And over here's a good picture of the egg masses. A lot of times you'll see these on dead elm trees and dead ash trees underneath the bark. So far this season, what we have found is copious amounts of spotted lanternfly on black walnut, particularly the fourth instar nymphs, to the point that we have seen black walnut in a state of decline, turning yellow, losing its foliage in midsummer, not due to anthracnose or anything like that, but due to feeding a spotted lanternfly, hickories, multiflora rose, and again, red and silver maple in particular. So tree of heaven ID, I'll cover this pretty quick. They're dioecious. We have male and female plants. And a big message we're trying to get out to the public is make sure you know it's tree of heaven before you remove it. We don't want, people removing butternuts, black walnut, staghorn sumac, smooth sumac, other desirable plants, confusing those, for tree of heaven. Here's tree of heaven in the winter. A good ID feature for tree of heaven, if the foliage is present are these glands on the backs of the leaves. And if you crush these little glands, they make a very foul odor. And of course, the fruit on tree of heaven is a winged samara, in contrast to the nut-like fruits of butternut and black walnut, and the drupes or berry-like fruits of sumacs. Simple message for tree of heaven control is, I can't tell how many property owners will tell us, hey, I tried to cut that down, it came back. You cannot just simply cut down tree of heaven. It will come back worse than ever before. You need to use herbicides, either the cut stump method or hack and squirt or a basal bark application to control tree of heaven. So tree of heaven not only harbors a spotted lanternfly, which can pose a threat to maple stands, but tree of heaven itself is a very aggressive sprouter that is fairly shade tolerant and can grow in maple stands and compete with the maples for nutrients and water. Basal bark applications are very effective at controlling tree of heaven and are a great, efficient method in larger stands where you're not worried about, a hazard tree falling on, power lines or automobiles, things like that. All right, so I do want to talk a little bit about Asian longhorn beetle, another important possible pest of maple stands in the region. Again, as Eric mentioned, we don't have it anywhere in West Virginia that we know of. And credits to the photos and text in this presentation go to Kristen Carrington. So Asian longhorn beetle is often abbreviated as ALB. It feeds on several different species of trees. Unfortunately, its preferred host is sugar maple. So unlike spotted lanternfly, where we can't say the preferred host is sugar maple, we have to say that for Asian longhorn beetle. Again, this insect is native to China. So just, like the spotted lanternfly, it's an Asian pest, not native to the United States. It's thought that it came to the United States through wood packaging material from Asia. And It was just like spotted lanternfly. It was first introduced on the East Coast, only this time in New York. This just shows you areas of ALB currently. So again, West Virginia does not have any confirmed Asian longhorn beetle to date. So a little about the insect itself. They're pretty large beetles. Picture's worth 1,000 words. I'll go ahead and show you a picture. The body is glossy black, these white spots on it. And you'll see the adults from late spring to fall. Again, similarly to spotted lanternfly, it'll kind of depend on the climate variables and the overall climate, in a particular region as to when the adults will emerge and disappear. So here's an adult male Asian longhorn beetle, and here's an adult female Asian longhorn beetle. So what do? Well, the females will chew down through the bark of a sugar maple tree or other preferable species to the cambium layer, the phloem, and then they will put their egg down there. And this will also create a visible scar on the surface of the tree. That's a good indicator, as to an infestation of ALB. So here's a picture of the scar that I just mentioned on a sugar maple. And so what happens is then as the larvae develop, they feed between the xylem and the phloem. And if in the plant physiology, that's not a good place to be feeding on a tree. That's where water nutrients are transported. And so when they eat that material, the tree becomes starved and it will die. Here's the larva. Most people aren't going to see this unless they cut into the bark, of course, with a hatchet and look for it. And then eventually this larva is going to enter its pupal stage. And then here's a picture of the pupa. Again, you won't typically see this unless you look for it in the tree. And then we get the adults. So again, here's a simple picture of the life cycle for ALB. And I am trying to go through these fairly quickly for the sake of time. So any questions, or if you would want me to show you the presentation or pictures or anything like that, just let me know. I will get you my contact information. So here's some pictures of what we would see on maples that are infested with Asian longhorn beetle. So put it kind of in perspective here. Here's a quarter. Looks like, no, it's not a quarter. Sorry, it's 10 cents Canadian. And then over here is a red maple tree that has significant Asian longhorn beetle damage on it. And eventually we have, decline, canopy, dieback, and eventual death of the tree. This tree here is a Crimson King cultivar of Norway maple, not a sugar maple, but the decline would be similar in appearance in a sugar maple if it were impacted by this insect. So common host trees, looks like about everything, not quite everything. A noticeable absent member from this list would be yellow poplar. That happens to be my favorite tree, so I'm happy about that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop my share.
Excellent. And while James, while we're hearing from Scott, we wanted to go ahead and go back to the slide to share after Scott's information, the scar from the longhorn beetle. Scott? Oh, yay. We've got you up and running, but you're in you're in slide mode, not presentation.
I'll get it in just a second.
Oh, there you go. Tom's on it. Thank
Okay. Okay, Scott, we're ready.
Okay, go ahead. Next slide.
Oh.
Just forward it ahead. Those are the 4 questions. Next slide. So the question about the major, no, not
Okay.
the question. No, went too far. Okay. What are the major threats to maple stands, maple production, and obviously focusing on Virginia? James gave a great overview. And so I'm gonna speed through some of the things that he's already mentioned because we have some of the same insects, for instance. But the first thing I noticed in my looking through some of the literature is that climate change is a big risk. It's a big threat to sugar maple production and obviously maple syrup production in the southern portion of the range of sugar maples. And so I'm going to talk about that just for a second, talk about some insects and then some pathogens. So next slide, Tom. Well, I found this article about the risk of climate change on maple syrup production in Virginia. Next click. It turns out there's a recent paper in Forest Ecology Management. Some of you, I think there was a webinar on some of this that may have been through this webinar group. But I went through this article and it looks pretty compelling about how the timing of year. Next click. I have a lot of animations. How basically the time for tapping trees is getting earlier and earlier into the season as a result of warming temperatures. And they do, I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but they do a projection that demonstrates that it's likely that there's going to be a significant reduction in the next century in maple syrup production. And this was based on some studies that they did work all the way from Southwest Virginia up until Quebec over multiple years. And they saw the effects of a warmer climate on production affected. And then with the combination of climate change, you can see where maple production occurs on the left part of this map right here from 1950 to 1999. And you can see the shift with the climate change from 2090 to 2099. So it's a long way off. Nevertheless, you can see that it's good. We're at risk where we are in West Virginia and Virginia for sure. So it's a threat. And so hopefully we get this figured out as a society. Next slide. Talk about insects. Next click. Spotted lanternfly has been very well covered already by James, so I don't need to spend a lot of time on that. The Asian longhorn beetle. Next click. Spongy moth used to be or formerly called the gypsy moth. Is also problematic. Next slide. Next click. And then there's a native. Those three are non-natives, and then there's a native called the sugar maple borer. So aptly named for an insect that only attacks sugar maple trees. Next slide. So the life stages, we've already seen those life stages of spotted lanternfly. And the adults live for quite a bit of time in the once they emerge in August. And that yellowing you see in the abdomen all the way to the right represents a reproductive female. So they have to feed on like tree of heaven, like was mentioned, in order for them to get the proper nutrients for them to be highly reproductive. And without that source of nutrition, they're not nearly as fecund with production of eggs. Next slide. Okay, another same map about the fact that this is an invader, and you can see that this was last year's map, and then we go to click again, and you can see that it's moving pretty quick. It's moving down that 81 corridor, pretty good. So major highways in Virginia, that's going to be where it happens, and you can see that in Virginia there, that's right next to Highland County where it's coming down. And Highland, I know, is certainly a maple producing county, maple syrup producing county in Virginia. Wide host range, obviously already talked about. Next slide. This just tells you a little bit about the phenology and the different hosts that we were able to follow over the course of a couple of years. This is data from 2019, and it shows you that really the message here is that there's a lot of hosts early on during the season, and then the focus is toward tree of heaven later in the season, one generation per year, but they are present on maples. And so that has been studied in a recent study published from Penn State University. They identified maples as a suitable host for spotted lanternfly. Next slide. These are all the trees at risk, and you can see that maples are part of that group. And it just shows you how they gather and aggregate onto the trunks of trees, and they gather their nutrients from phloem, take up that sap, and they produce honeydew. They excrete it, and then sooty mold is produced from that. And with maple syrup production, you don't have to have a problem. You don't have to have an agent that kills a tree. All it has to do is weaken that tree, and that can really impact the production. So that's why it's a major concern. Next slide. So Virginia Department of Consumer Services has Agriculture and Consumer Services has a link that I'm showing there. Next click. And I put all these links are going to be made available in the chat later for you. One more click. And you can see all this information is available at VDAX regarding, spotted lanternfly. And then also the fact that it is in quarantine in Virginia in those counties that were highlighted in blue. And there are people that are moving goods across state lines need to be certified if they're coming from areas that have been infested with spotted lanternfly into areas that are uninfested with spotted lanternfly. And I'm sure Eric will speak to that a little bit maybe later, or he can speak to that. So, this is quite a list of information available for those that are concerned about spotted lanternfly. So that's all I'll say for that right now. Next slide. And so James and I, it's like we were reading each other's minds. Asian longhorn beetle obviously is important and very concerning. And first found in New York in 1996. It has not moved at the lightning speed that something like emerald ash borer has. And basically, Eric mentioned we've had some successes with eradication methodology, because they don't disperse that well, we have a better chance at removing them from locales and preventing them from spreading. At least we have a fighting chance with this particular insect. So again, showing a similar slide to the same slide that James did. Next slide. You can see that there are areas where eradication have been successful. There are some active infestations that have occurred, all mostly in the Northeast, the Midwest. And as was mentioned, it's now found in South Carolina, and they're very active. I think the perimeter isn't all that small. I think they're working really hard on it down there. I also want to mention down here in the lower right-hand side, Asian longhorn beetle looks a lot like some native longhorn beetles that we have, white spotted sawyer. So, you may be out looking for this, and this is an insect where you should be out there looking for this, because you never know when it's going to be in your neck of the woods. And in Virginia, we're looking for it. So there are a whole lot of people looking for this right now. And so you may be the one to spot it if you find it on your trees. And so the thing is that it looks like some other longhorn beetles. So you want to make sure you get an expert to verify or ID whatever it is that you do find. And don't move firewood. That's a big way for these things to move. Next slide. All right, so I got the spongy moth here, as I mentioned, formerly called the gypsy moth, and its preferred hosts are oaks. And so why talk about them with maples? Because when populations get really high, they will overflow, and in the later portions of their life cycle, they will feed on maple trees. And so if outbreaks of spongy moth take place, and they do so periodically at regional levels, then there's a whole program involved in trying to manage them. So obviously you don't want these on your trees, stressing your trees out, because the defoliation is not good for the trees. Next slide. This just shows you the distribution of spongy moth. The dark blue represents where they're already established, and the green zone there represents a boundary area, an action area where they are monitored very heavily. And the idea is to slow the spread. This is an insect that came into Massachusetts in the 1860s. There's a whole story behind it, and it's moved this slowly. It took emerald ash borer about 15 years to move this fast. And this is 150 years later, and this is how far the insects moved. It's got a huge host range, but the females don't fly, and that's pretty much kept it in check. So, but the spreading does take place. There are a couple of mechanisms in which they spread. And so the overall effort is to slow that spread. And so this boundary layer is used to collect data on spongy moth captured in pheromone traps to identify population heavy areas, and then really focus on trying to eradicate those population areas in this green boundary zone. So it's a coordinated effort between the feds and all the state agencies in trying to put this together. And so I'm not going to get a lot into this because there's so much that goes on with the spongy moth, but nevertheless, this is an insect that has potential risk feeding on maple trees. Next slide. Okay, so there are some leaf diseases that are identified for maple that are considered something to monitor. Again, you know, if you weaken a tree, it's stressed, and if it's stressed, it's not going to produce as much syrup. Anthracnose, where you have portions of the leaves dying. There's a fungus that causes that. Next click. Fungal leaf spots like tar spot here. Again, that reduces its ability for the tree to photosynthesize. Next click. Powdery mildew, another fungus that obviously causes some problems with photosynthesis. And the last one, verticillium wilt. So James mentioned verticillium. He didn't mention it, but he had it. I saw it was a bullet on the bottom of his Ailanthus treatment slide. And I don't have, as Tom mentioned, maybe I'll talk about Ailanthus biocontrol, but I'm really not going to get into that here. But I will say that this verticillium wilt, we have a native verticillium that does impact maples, and it's a soil inhabiting fungus that gets into the root systems and gets up into the trees and causes them to wilt. So there are two species in particular, and the one that affects maples is Verticillium dahliae, and it can be impactful. And treatments for this are there are not really very good treatments for this kind of pathogen. There's another species of verticillium that is affecting tree of heaven, and this is a good thing. Verticillium wilt on maple is a bad thing. Verticillium wilt on Ailanthus is a good thing, because we found that there's a specific strain that focuses on Ailanthus and will kill all the trees in a stand that grow up clonally by moving through the root systems. So you can actually, and we've been testing this experimentally, and we're working toward registration of using this bioherbicide as a way to control tree of heaven. And we're not there yet, but we're actively working on an APHIS PPQ grant to fast track the registration toward a commercial product. So that's all I got for pathogens, and I think this is where I am. One more click and let's see where I'm at. Okay, so this addresses the next question.
There you go. And you know what, Tom, why don't you leave that up there for a second, and then I don't have to read it to everybody. Great job. I really like the fact that you've addressed the threats environmentally, ancillary, identifying tree of heaven as something to think about. Great job. The other thing I noticed with the map visualizations was our friends that are joining us this evening from Pure Michigan, we could see them on the map. And so this is impactful to them as well on a regional basis. And like we like to say in agritourism, visitors don't know county and state lines, and threats to our maple woodlots don't know state and county lines. So it's important to look at it on a regional basis as well. So with that, we're going to go to our next question, and that basically is asking about programs. And what I want you to do as participants is to think about that as we go through these programs that are available to you, in addition to being a resource for you as the landowner or the forest steward, is what we like to call in our non-timber forest program at Future Generations, is think about how you as a citizen woodland steward can utilize these resources. And we'll go ahead and go through that in the next question, but just be formulating, oh, okay, I need help with identification. And if it's what I suspect, then here are the programs I can use to help address, and understanding that it's not just about the bottle of syrup, that we're really looking at the health of our forest, because, that's kind of what we need in order to be efficient in production and those kinds of things. So with that, Eric, I'm going to start with you. Can you go ahead and go over those programs, especially as they relate to how our producers can utilize and have a handle on forest health?
Sure. And one thing, Cindy, I had a couple of things that I kind of jotted down during the first question that might be of interest before we get too far from that. Scott mentioned something about quarantines for spotted lanternfly. I just wanted to let everyone know there is no federal quarantine in place for spotted lanternfly. It is a state-by-state quarantine. Some states have enacted them, like Virginia. Some states have not. Others are probably, some of the newer states are probably working on current state quarantines, but just want to make sure everyone was aware that this is a state-by-state issue. The USDA has decided not to regulate spotted lanternfly. So just make sure everyone knows that. As far as some of the programs that we offer, right now, the one that's keeping us very busy, and we'll stay on the spotted lanternfly theme, is SLF. And we've conducted a lot of work in those counties that we know to be infested. We're conducting a treatment program. Unfortunately, we, like most of the states that have this pest, we don't have enough resources to really effectively control this pest. As Scott and James have mentioned, it is very prolific. I mean, it's out there everywhere. It spreads quickly. They're just really difficult to stay ahead of. But we are treating. Most of that work has been on private land. So if you do have an SLF infestation, someone can come and treat that with federal dollars, sometimes with state dollars, depending on the state. It's free of charge, and hopefully it stays that way. The treatment is usually, as James mentioned, either a contact insecticide like bifenthrin or systemic like dinotefran. It's pretty safe for the most part because we're treating with backpacks, so we're spraying close to the tree, don't have any aerial application or anything like that yet. There are other products that are sometimes being used, or techniques, I should say, spray guns from trucks and some mist blowers in other states, but it's usually been in areas that are far from houses or any kind of public buildings. So far in our state, we've just used the backpacks. It works well. The problem is there are just so many of them, and it's spreading so quickly on us. And as we get new states, the resources per state get slimmer and slimmer. So that has been the problem so far. But we do offer that service, and hope it continues. We also provide information to landowners who want to conduct their own treatments or want to get rid of a tree of heaven on their property. So we'll help them with information about how to go about that, the best products to use, and that's been effective for folks that want to do that work for themselves. One thing I also mentioned as far as programs, WVDA has a cooperative suppression program for spongy moth that's funded partially by the Forest Service, and I think there's some state dollars involved as well. That's been an excellent program for a long time. Spongy moth in West Virginia has been around for quite some time, I think since the early 80s. We've been fortunate the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years with a fungus known as entomophaga, which attacks the larvae and has really helped us to keep it in check. So these wet springs we're having, the fungus has really done well, and it's we haven't had to treat, to my knowledge, for spongy moth for quite a few years now. So let's hope it stays that way. We've had some defoliation here and there, and as Scott mentioned, it's always a threat. If we have a dry spring, it could really come roaring back. So if that happens, hopefully that cooperative suppression program will stay in effect for those that need it. And I think I'll just turn it over to James after that.
Actually, let's go to Scott, if we could.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
fine too.
Yeah. And then James, you can bring it home. How's that? Tom Hammett, yeah, there you go. There we go. You're on, Scott.
Okay, so I'm addressing current, basically what do we have in Virginia? And so I've kind of identified some of the personnel, contact people, and links for those of you in Virginia. We've got Lori Chamberlain is our Forest Health Program Manager, and Caitlin DeWitt is a Forest Health Specialist. They are a tag team of two really, really good people working on all kinds of issues regarding forest health, and obviously all kinds of forest landowners. And so I have a link here. VDOF really has a nice presence, a website presence with a lot of documentation and information available to landowners and managers for all kinds of issues. And they're filtered by forest health or economics or timber, whatever it is you look for. And this link will take you to this. So right here is the DOF Forest Management, Forest Health link. And so again, these links will be posted in the chat sometime during this presentation, and I encourage you to go there. Next slide. What about cooperative extension? So we've got county extension agents for one. We've got and at the end I'm going to identify two particular forest extension foresters that might be worth visiting with if you're in the maple syrup producing parts of Virginia. But I'm putting up Eric Day right here, who runs the Virginia Tech Insect ID Lab. And there's a link to the ID Lab. It's very easy to find. Just go to the Department of Entomology and the ID Lab is there. And he really works with extension agents around the state. They send him samples of damage or insects, and it's his job and his team's job to identify them best that they can, and he's really, really good at it. He gives presentations around the state, and I'll mention him later when I talk about some of the programs that are ongoing with citizen science. So that's one contact at Virginia Tech for getting insects identified that you might have find in your stand. And again, it goes through extension agents. Next click. There's also just one floor down in Price Hall. I'm in Price Hall, one of the oldest buildings on campus. There's a plant disease clinic. And again, this clinic focuses on pathogens that attack plants. And so they do the same thing. They take specimens in, damage in, try to identify what the problems are, and they help landowners or managers kind of identify what might be attacking their plants. This is there is a fee for using this disease clinic to try to support the costs of doing that. I don't think it's a big significant fee, but it is something that I noticed on their website, and it's run through the School of Plant and Environmental Sciences at Virginia Tech. Next. There's a Virginia Master Naturalist Program, which is, a lot of states have these naturalist programs. It's like Master Gardeners, but it's for folks focused on sort of more natural systems. And so this is a volunteer organization, and they're trained through 4-H and Extension to really serve as an interface between, agencies and professionals and private citizens. And they provide all kinds of information and have different kinds of programs. And they are actually involved in programs with the spotted lanternfly, and they work with Eric Day and his group on trying to identify new locations of spotted lanternfly. And so there's a link there that that shows you how you can get into that organization or learn more about what they do. Next slide.
Scott, I just want
ahead.
I want you to add something to that. We have a Master Naturalist program in Southwest Virginia in Wise County, and that's the focus of their work is with sugar maple and tree saps, and they do have a couple of members that are monitoring spotted lanternfly.
So
hey, that's great to know.
So that's question 3, I believe. So let me go ahead and defer to James real quick and go ahead and get his answers to question 2 in terms of how it's filtering down from that federal level that Eric talked about to West Virginia as a state.
Great. Thanks, Cindy. So just for the sake of time, I'll just mostly speak on the species that I presented on. For spotted lanternfly, the West Virginia Department of Agriculture are state cooperators with APHIS on controlling spotted lanternfly. And so we do offer treatment programs to the public. So what we do is we will, for those individuals that have property within the boundaries of an infested area of spotted lanternfly, a treatment area, we will visit the properties, inventory the tree of heaven on the property, and then we'll come back at a later date and we will kill the small tree of heaven, and then we will treat the larger tree of heaven with a systemic insecticide. And then we also have the option to treat other species and objects with a contact insecticide as well. Those services are not mandatory. They're fully, just an option to the public and landowners. If they so choose, they can sign an agreement and then we'll, complete those treatments on the property. So that's what we offer in a nutshell for our spotted lanternfly control treatment. And so kind of, again, part of that treatment is also controlling tree of heaven on the property as well. So we're sort of killing, 2 pests there with 1 stone. So to speak. And thankfully, we don't have Asian longhorn beetle in our state yet, so we don't need to worry about that. And then we do have good outreach materials developed for the public, particularly, we're providing information on controlling spotted lanternfly and tree of heaven to the public and encouraging landowners to take action on their end and be proactive and in anticipation of spotted lanternfly coming to their property if they don't already have it. So we also have extension in our state, WVU State Extension, WVU Extension, and they also have a lot of information available, on mitigating these pests and controlling them on people's property. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the big question, the big thing is there's lots of folks out there. And even if you contact someone like Eric, he's going to be able to give you more specific contacts to address your specific issue. So it's just a matter of asking. With that, I want to transition to Tom real quickly because Scott started us down the road and we're going to let him pick it up again. And that's that whole concept of citizen reporting for these pests. As you're encountering things in your sugar bush, we've given you kind of what to look for, but I believe most folks are looking for that independent confirmation. And so how do we work with each other? Because again, not only do pests and threats not know county and state borders, but your neighbors, your property boundaries. So one person's issue could be another's, and they may not be aware of it. So Tom, kind of give us that concept of citizen science programs and how they can relate to us creating a network to help all of us ensure our forest health for both our tree syrups and also our non-based timber products, that kind of thing. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then we'll let Scott zoom in and talk about how Virginia is utilizing that concept.
You want Scott to go ahead?
You want Scott to go ahead, or you, Tom? Do you want to? Do you want to do an overview?
Scott. Scott's got. He's all primed. He's ready to go.
Okay, ready to go. All right, Scott, you're on.
I don't want to get in his way.
I love that. That was great. No, yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I went into the third question. I had my slides all look the same, so I didn't realize I was.
We made it work.
Okay. So yeah, the Master Naturalist program is obviously, they are part of the citizen science program as well. And we, it's not, it requires an advocate. It requires some leadership to really build this into any kind of program. And the folks at the Insect ID Lab, specifically Eric Day, and then working with our Spongy Moth database management group, developed some apps, working with extension agents or specialists, Mike Sutphin up in the Winchester area. They all kind of put their heads together and came up with this program for the spotted lanternfly. So I'm putting something out here regarding citizen science that has been used for detecting spotted lanternfly, because for the longest time it was stuck in a 1 to 2 county area in Virginia for really 2 years. And so they gave them a lot of time to mobilize and get the master naturalists trained. And if you go to, if you actually hit this link right here, which is this one that I've showing down here, the hot link, there's a page that identifies different modules that were produced, like webinars basically, or presentations on how you go about searching for, sampling for, collecting data, reporting the data remotely, the data being disseminated into a database, and so on and so forth. There's a whole string of activities that end up taking place, but the person on the ground, these very interested volunteers, can collect data and input the data that ends up in the database, and helps folks that are working on these problems really make some good decisions or know where to look for particular new identifications and so on and so forth. Obviously, they need to be verified at some point. So I put this up here just because it shows an example of what can be done, but it wouldn't have happened spontaneously. It happened because, there was some leadership and effort that was made by a few individuals that were working on a particular problem. So for those master naturalists, for instance, that Tom mentioned, that are working in the maple industry or working with sugar maple trees, this could be something. It doesn't have to be at the same scale or anything like that, but this could be something where they are training people to look out for different kinds of stressors that could impact the health of their tree, and report on that. And it could be done from different areas. I'm thinking off the top of my head now. And they could report from different areas in the state of Virginia, and then West Virginia. Why not coordinate between states? We have a similar, topography and climate and so on. And, there's just a border there, but we're really close to each other. And get folks out there looking. And, if there are some proactive landowners or maple syrup producers that really want to help get the word out, they can participate in this.
Awesome. So with that premise in mind, Tom Hammett, you're particularly interested in how we can make these kind of citizen action groups come into a network in terms of identifying those maple threats. So we want to go ahead and check with our partners at the West Virginia level in terms of Eric and James, in terms of programs specific that might address similar kinds of advocacy.
Well, I'll go ahead and get started and then I'll turn it over to James. So we have lots of different types of outreach projects. WVDA we've partnered with them for years on outreach projects. Matter of fact, every year they get funding from the Plant Protection Act, and I work with Tim Brown, the director with the Plant Industries Division, to ensure that they get funding for outreach, and they are really good at outreach. I speak highly of them all the time. James and all the staff there, they just do an excellent job of speaking to citizens across the state, telling them about threats and telling them what they can do to protect their own properties and to help out, because we don't have enough people to really look for some of these pests as thoroughly as we'd like to. So it's a big help. The Spotted Lanternfly program is a good example of how citizens have been really a valuable part of the team for us, because I don't know the numbers exactly, but of our 5 or 6 counties that are infested, maybe all of them or most of them, we first found out about it from a report from a citizen. They've educated themselves, they're seeing the outreach materials, and they're calling us. I get lots of emails during this time of year when the adults are active. I get phone calls from people just saying, hey, I saw where I'm supposed to report this, and I just want you to know. And that shows that the outreach is working. So that federal funding that we're presenting to WVDA to do this work, they're doing a great job with it. So that's the big thing for us, is to engage those folks out on their own properties, to be looking, and people care. And it's been very good for us. We've been doing outreach. Even when I was the director at WVDA, we were doing a lot of outreach then and before I took over. It's just something that we've gotten better and better at in West Virginia. So I'm real proud of that. My staff conducts some education and outreach, but I only have 5 full-time staff members, and we're covering the entire state. Lots of field work, lots of export certification work. So we don't have as much time for it as the WVDA staff, which is much larger. So they do the majority of it, but we do some with them, double team some situations, and it's worked out really well. It's been a little bit of a challenge the last couple of years because we haven't been able to do as much in person. We were so used to being able to sit in a room with folks and talk to them about pest issues and what they can do to help. And that's changed, but we're learning how to do it virtually. We're getting better at it, I think. So hopefully we can continue to get that word out there. But again, I just want to stress that partnering with the State Department of Ag has helped us tremendously. And I'll let James elaborate on that.
Thanks, Eric. Let me go ahead and pull this in here. I guess it would be.
So while James is getting loaded up, remember those 4 folks that you see on your screen has highlighted. If you're in Michigan, if you're in Kentucky, they have folks that at the same level as they are. And I know Eric has shared with me some contact information for other states. So please feel free to reach out to them if you're not specific to West Virginia or Virginia and want to know what's out there. James is going to go ahead and wrap up in terms of at the state level, what we've got available.
All right, thanks, Cindy. Can you guys see my screen, programs and services?
Not yet, James.
Not yet.
Okay. Let me try this. Hold on just a second.
Yeah, it's coming.
Okay. I'm not gonna worry about trying to get it into the other mode right now. My computer's acting kind of silly, and for the sake of time, let's just go through the discussion here. So for the first, I'll talk about what we do as the West Virginia Department of Agriculture. So, as Eric mentioned, I appreciate that. We work a lot with the community to raise awareness and educate them on a variety of, forest health issues. We give a lot of presentations to groups, go to a lot of fairs and have, booths out and that sort of thing. We even go as far as what I've been trying to do a lot of recently is to, to increase awareness with spotted lanternfly, to do walkthroughs in towns and provide literature to numerous businesses. That really allows us to reach a much wider demographic, diverse audience, than it would if we only went to fairs and spoke to groups, because typically you only have, specific demographics at those events. Just like, no offense, we have a demographic that's at this event right now, but when we go to a cellular telephone store and we give them information to raise awareness of pest issues, it's hard to tell who's going to be coming in there, to see the materials and so on. So, really trying to get the community involved and educate them on these invasive pests such as tree of heaven and spotted lanternfly, and Asian longhorn beetle as well. So we also, work with APHIS, and they help us out a lot as well, in getting these outreach activities complete. We also have a bug buster site, which I will show you the link to here later on, that we provide to the community and to landowners so that they can quickly have an easy to remember address to report questions that they may have to and insects that they see, and that's staffed by a very knowledgeable individual, Barry Crutchfield, that quickly gets back with them and identifies potential pests. Often it's not a pest, it's just an insect they think might be a pest, of course. But he's very knowledgeable and gets back with landowners very quickly on identifying those insects and other plant-related questions that they may have. And then other entities in the state that offer a lot of information or put on workshops. We have West Virginia Division of Forestry. They have numerous outreach activities as well, such as Women Owning Woodlands, that actively engages women landowners into mitigating problems on their property, improving their timber and wildlife habitat, things like that. West Virginia Woodland Stored, that's they have a meeting once a month, and there's always good speakers on there that engage the public and educate them about forest health issues and silviculture and so on. And then WVU Extension, WVU State Extension, as I mentioned previously, they host numerous workshops and activities to enhance groups such as master gardeners, master naturalists, things of that nature, walks to educate about different crops that can be grown in the forest understory, and so on. So all of these entities work together really well in our state. We collaborate with all these entities as well, and we feel like we have a really good presentation overall to the community to get the landowners actively engaged and involved in not only workshops but educational experiences that are hands-on. And that's it for me.
Kind of that. Our final question for the evening is a forward thinking. If I was a woodland owner, specifically a woodland steward that was engaged in tree syrups, maple syrup, and we've done a great job of covering the whole range of of syrup producing species. In the next 6 months, what could I do that would help engage and also become part of that starting of a forest support or network in terms of identifying threats to woodlands? And it can be environmental threats or any threat that we've talked about this evening. So we asked each of the panelists to go ahead and give us some thoughts on that in terms of how you can be proactive. So let's go ahead and start this time with James. We'll just let you go ahead and bring it home in terms of your slides.
All right, thank you. Go ahead and find the share again here. And let's see here. All right, can you guys see my screen again? Excellent, great. Okay, so I would say moving forward, things that we encourage, landowners for storage to do are number one, to learn to identify forest pests. So pay attention, at presentations, ask questions. Don't worry about asking a dumb question. If you don't know it, other people probably don't know it as well. And then also take advantage of all these great resources we have available today. And everybody has a smartphone. Well, not everybody, but most people have a smartphone, and they can, figure out all kinds of games to play and things to do on it. But unfortunately, sometimes you'll mention like an app or something that they can install on their phone to help them identify insects or plants. And that's a great educational moment, because unfortunately, they're completely unaware that those exist. So really try to learn to identify forest pests, be aware of them, where they exist, what the potential is that they could be in your land, and so on. Get involved. So take advantage again of workshops, that are out there to enhance their knowledge of, forest pests and forest health, and how they can improve their forest overall on their property. And then also, I would like to encourage landowners in particular to get involved, get hands-on. It's great to have all the book learning, so to speak, but if they don't have the ability or the interest in actually getting out there and doing something on their property, then the book learning doesn't really, it doesn't come to any fruition. So really need to be hands-on. Actually go out, get the herbicide, remove Japanese barberry on your property. It's great to be able to identify it, but remove it. I kind of like to use the analogy, and this sounds terrible sometimes, but you have sometimes people have kids and they get them so involved in so many programs that they can't really excel in any one area. And so sometimes it's hard for landowners because they have so many distractions, even within the area of natural resources and education, that they don't really have a lot of time to get out on their property and do the work. So try not to be distracted by things. Get out, get hands-on, and practice what you learned. And then next will be report. So again, as it's been illustrated multiple times here this evening, report what you find. It's okay if you send us a picture of an insect and it's something that's native and harmless. You need to find out that you're learning that that's a good insect. And then if it is a bad insect, then we will know where it's at. We'll be able to have a better handle on the distribution of that pest and be able to mitigate its spread on the landscape. So report, very important. And then here is the Bug Busters email address that I promised, as well as a phone number. This is for the West Virginia Department of Agriculture. So again, I'll have the slide here so you guys can write that down if you were interested in it. WVU Extension and WVU State Extension, again, they're great resources. They, like I said, they collaborate with each other, with us. And the best thing to do is to go to the WVU Extension site, for example, find the extension agent for your county if you're in West Virginia, and then they can get you in touch with the right person if they don't know the answer, and most likely they'll know the answer as well. So that's all I have for looking forward.
Thank you very much, James. I appreciate all the research you did for that and providing the resources. Scott, can we go to you next and go ahead and get a Virginia perspective?
James did a great job about encouraging, like a nice pep talk on having landowners get out there. I think the thing to do for landowners is maple producers who are working closely with their trees is they know when their trees are healthy and when they're not healthy. So really, really just be aware of how your trees are doing. And if they look like they're in distress, maybe if the syrup production is below what you're expecting, there are things to look for. We've identified a few of those things. The idea of going to meetings and seminars where extension specialists are out there providing you with information, take advantage of that if you have the time and the ability to do that. I think if you're interested, these are the opportunity is there. And I also wanted to make available to everyone the Virginia Cooperative Extension has some specialists that are forestry extension specialists that work in particularly the northwest and southwest regions of Virginia where maple production takes place. And those folks are a resource, obviously, to learn about where meetings are, or to learn about any kind of training sessions, or to maybe ask questions of them. And so this is a map. You can get this from the Virginia Cooperative Extension website, and you can get access to all offices throughout Virginia. And if you go to the next slide, these two individuals up in the Northwest District is Adam Downing. He's an extension agent and natural resource manager, forester. He's your contact person. Learn from him, or learn about things that are going on in your region. And then the next one is in the Southwest District. We got Bill Worrell. I remember Bill Worrell taking a class with me many years ago. So these are two individuals you can contact. They're on the ground, interacting with you and others like you, and also those that are in other forest industries, or looking for other commercial outputs, or whatever it is with forest management. These folks are on your side, so make sure you contact them. That's their job, and they love doing it. That's what I have.
Great. I know we're getting short on time here. I wanted to give Tom an opportunity to do a wrap up. Remind folks that now is the time when our forest folks are getting out in the woodlots. So that information and thoughts and ideas about current opportunities and action plans are great, because folks are starting to work the woods in anticipation of the upcoming SERP season. So with that, Tom, do you want to go ahead and give us a quick wrap up? And then maybe we'll have time for a couple questions. The other thing is, Kate, if you could chime in and let folks know that we're going to make all these resources available in terms of the presentations and links. Go ahead.
Okay, well, a couple of things. One is Cindy and I have been working together on a program to help producers across the region. And we thought during the summer that'd be good to bring a group together like we've had tonight, Eric, James, and Scott, to talk about pests. And I think my summary comment would be is I think that the discussion tonight's been very, very helpful. It's opened up my eyes to a few new wrinkles, you might say, and a few new areas. And it was much broader than just talking about spotted lanternfly. It was much broader than that. And it just shows us that there's a lot out there we need to learn about. I would like to encourage everybody to take note of the comments that were made about how we can work together to monitor the situation, and then most importantly, find help. Cindy and I are available, plus the others at Future Generations, to help you on this. Kate is manning the show tonight. She's also available in the field. So there's several of us that could help you go through this process of finding out what's in your woods, how it might impact you, and then link you up with the three specialists that we've had tonight. I want to offer my special thanks to all three of you for taking time out this evening. It's a busy time for everybody, and I think it worked out really well. I really appreciate work together very nicely. Cindy, I think we have time for a couple more questions. There was one in the chat that I noted. Sarah asked if we could show this again, the scar of the ALB, the Asian longhorn beetle. Was that your slides, James, or Scott's? I can't remember. There's a scar for the ALB.
I can show it if you would like.
Would you? Okay, go ahead.
And while you're doing that, Mark, I knew you were on board. He's given us a link to the current business development, which we're also very interested in at the Appalachian team. University of Vermont is providing some programming in that under an ACER program. So he's given the link for that, and I believe it's free. And someone else posted earlier that Penn State is having a session, I believe, next week. So go back through the chat and and if you're interested in those resources. In the meantime, there we go. James, what are we looking at?
Can you guys see the big holes in the red maple tree there? So that's the scars from the Asian longhorn beetle damage. So this would look, similar on a sugar maple or a Norway maple. This is a red maple tree here, and it would be more visible if the bark is, young, as the case on this red maple tree here.
Kind of make Swiss cheese out of those trees.
Mhm.
It does, yeah. And again, the big issue there is that, the reason that's there is because they're emerging and they're feeding on the the phloem and the cambial tissue. And so they're preventing uptake of, moisture and nutrients in the tree. So.
And it's a fairly large hole, so it's easier to spot than some exit wounds from other insects.
Right, exactly. Yeah, even on more mature bark that's becoming more ridged and furrowed or scaly, you're still going to see these big, holes on it.
And if you see something like this on your trees, you would want to take a hatchet or some kind of axe and try to really pull the bark back, so you can see what's underneath, because there's a lot of information when you pull the bark back. Yeah, the bark hides a lot. You see the holes. If you can get access to it, pull that bark back, you'll see galleries, you'll see holes in the xylem tissue or sapwood. Then you're in big trouble here. To differentiate between a sapsucker and woodpeckers or something like that.
Yeah, people worry about damaging the tree when they do that, but if you're seeing something that is that suspicious looking, the chances are the tree's already quite damaged, or it's going to digress to something more serious anyway. So the little bit of damage that you would do digging into there to find out and confirm what's going on, it's better to ruin one tree than ruin the whole stand. So
I agree 100%. I'd be nervous about chopping in, but if you see the canopy is declining, or the crown's declining severely, the tree's in severe stress, you just need to find out why.
Yep, exactly.
At that point.
Eric's got his hand up. Eric, you got a comment?
Yes, he does.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to mention one thing before we get further into the questions. I did put in the chat a link to USDA's Hungry Pests website. That's another way that folks can get information. And the nice thing about that site is there's a drop-down menu. I think it's on the right side of the page. And you can choose your state. And when you choose your state, it gives you a list of pests that are a concern for your state, that may already be established in your state, that may have eradication programs in progress. And it also gives you contacts for your state plant health director, which would be my counterpart in that state. And it also gives you the contact for the state plant regulatory official, which is typically the person that is in charge of a plant industries type division for the State Department of Agriculture. So good information on that website. I would encourage you to check that out and bookmark it.
I also see where Mark has shared a video series in relation to the healthy maintenance of sugar bushes. So check that out. Tom Hammett has also posted the upcoming Virginia Tree Serp Academy. There's just lots of good information in terms of links and resources. Folks were asking earlier about apps, and people were sharing. Again, this is part of an excellent start to a good network. So we want to encourage ways of continuing to do that involving all states, because I think there's lessons to be learned all around. We're going to go ahead and give a last call for questions. Kate's going to hop in, I think, and talk about answering a few questions at the end of this presentation for documentation. So Kate, take it away, and we'll continue to monitor the chat for questions.
Absolutely. Thanks, folks, for joining us tonight. We have a couple fun things going on. If you are in our local West Virginia area, we have a workshop in Philippi on the 22nd. So that's this Saturday on tubing sanitation. Feel free to email syrup@future.edu for more information. Beyond that, stay tuned for more webinar series. We are taking November off, but we will be back in December. And through the maple season, I think we are focusing a little bit more heavily on production information. So that's sort of what we're looking forward to. And one last thing before anybody gets out of here, we have a poll. Just tell us how we're doing. If you enjoyed tonight's session, it helps us sort of monitor how our webinars are going. And then after you leave, a survey will pop up if you have any suggestions on future webinar topics. Thank you so much for attending.
Thanks. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Tom, for clicking those slides.
All right, you're welcome. My pleasure. And thank you, Scott, for
Okay.
jumping in and taking this on.
Great job,
Most
panelists.
welcome.
That was awesome.
Right.
Thank
We
you.
really appreciate it. I think we need to send each one of them a bottle of syrup.
Sounds good to me.
I like the idea.
Scott,
Not gonna lie, I don't mind that at all.
Scott,
I was
I'll
gonna
deliver
say,
your bottle. put
Tom,
your
you're
bottle
gonna
in
have
the
to do
little shot.
that. I'm going back to the syrup desert.
Oh, you're going to Wyoming, right?
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take
Have a
care,
good
Ricky.
evening.
Be safe.
Everyone have a good evening. Take care.
Bye-bye.